Everyone, and this is our belief, should have 30 to 40% of their asset that should be their properties, if not more.
If you have 1 million euros, they're going to pay you at least 6% of your investment yearly.
What would I expect to encounter on my journey towards purchasing a property? What would you advise me I should look out for?
With significant low deposits, you can get a property that finances itself.
They say that the property where you live is a liability, and the property that you rent is actually an asset.
So you give me 1 million euros, every year I'm going to give you 60,000 euros.
So we're not taking this step, buying into a property that is an income generating asset and that will bring capital appreciation.
Gillon, thank you for joining me once again. Episode 6 of the investment journey. We talked about Porte du Soleil last time in November, which you are a resident of. And today we're going to talk about your neighbours, the Grand Massif, which is somewhere that I've been now 3 times. My friend owns a place in Samoëns. It's a beautiful destination. It seems, talking with Alex in the last episode about the 3 valleys, we talked about kind of the central resorts of Courchevel and Méribel, and then talked about these satellite resorts that were kind of up and coming, added more value for money and had a different experience than those main resorts. And I think about the Grand Massif against the Porte du Soleil, against the 3 valleys, against Val des Antines, and they're the Méribel and Courchevel in that comparison. They're the iconic ones that everyone knows about. But the Grand Massif is a super exciting domain. It's the 4th biggest, I believe, in the French Alps, covers about 265 kilometers of pistes, and it's a bit of an upcoming destination. It's somewhere that you know very well. So maybe we can just start with your experience of the Grand Massif, what you love about it, and rather than just talking about the geography of it, who do you think the Grand Massif and certain select resorts it's most attractive to for what sort of investor?
Yeah, sure. So I had the joy of living there for 3 years from 2009. It was a place that I didn't really know anything about when I arrived there, and I just was looking for jobs in the Alps, and I found this one as a resort manager for one of the accommodation providers in Samoëns, actually, and came out without any knowledge of the area, got this job, met the locals, really loved it, and ended up staying there for 3 years in the end. So I lived in Samoëns and Sixt, which is just a bit further down the valley. So you've got Samoëns, Sixt, Morillon, Les Carreaux and Flaine. So 5 resorts that make up the whole Grand Massif ski area. And each of those resorts is a little bit different to the others. Samoëns is probably the most charming. It's renowned for stone masonry. So a lot of the architecture there is really beautiful. There's lots of sculptures all around the village. And it is a really kind of real village. It doesn't feel purpose-built like Flaine, for example, which is really high altitude and great access to some of the best skiing, but it's not as pretty in terms of the architecture and the village feel. So it's got a really nice year-round community. There's quite a few Brits there, which can be positive and negative, but they're really well integrated with the French as well, and there's a very good sense of community, and everyone knows each other. It's the kind of place you walk down the street and everyone's saying hi. The other great thing about it that I think is very unique is it's one of the easiest resorts to access from Geneva Airport. It's only 1 hour on a good day. And most of that is on motorway, and even the Samoëns Valley itself is very straight, not windy. So it's not like going up to Saint-Martin-de-Belleville, which is a beautiful drive, but it's extremely windy. And it takes a bit longer to get to those 3 valleys resorts than it does to get to the Grand Massif. So that's a huge selling point. The other thing is the perfect, almost perfect east to west aspect of the valley. So it gets a load of sunlight even in the winter. One side of the valley in particular gets more sunlight, the south-facing side obviously, but the majority of the whole domain, I think around 80% of the whole domain is north-facing aspects, so it holds the snow longer. So one of the points that comes up with the Grand Massif is that it's maybe lower altitude than a lot of the brothers and sisters in the 3 valleys, but it's very easy to access the high altitude. So Samoëns itself is only 720 meters, so low, one of the lowest resorts I can think of. But within 2 lifts, you're at 2,200, and then within 3 or 4 lifts, you're at 2,500, and all very modern, great infrastructure to connect the different resorts. And the other thing is that the connectivity between those 5 resorts is probably some of the best I've seen, especially in the Haute Savoie. If you go to Chamonix, it's an iconic place. Some of the best high altitude skiing in the world, and very popular with Americans, and everyone knows it. But the different resorts in Chamonix aren't very well connected. Sometimes you have to jump on a bus to get from one to the other. So that's a great thing about it. Like you say, over 265 kilometers of skiable piste, plus incredible backcountry. There's a north-facing powder bowl called the Gère Bowl. The locals are going to kill me for talking about it, but some of the best powder skiing you can find in the Haute Savoie is there, and really easy to access. And even though it's easy to access, it doesn't get tracked out as much as Chamonix. You go to Chamonix and by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's fully tracked out on a powder day. You go to the Gère Bowl, tell only your best friends, but you go there and 9 days later, you're still skiing fresh lines if it stays cold. So very different in that sense. Then, as we talked about on the last podcast, mountain biking is my main thing, and it's got some incredible mountain biking too. Not necessarily family-friendly mountain biking. There's not a lot of green runs or blue runs, but if you're a keen mountain biker, then it's got some incredible tracks from Samoëns 1600 down into the village itself at 720 through the forest there. There's probably 6 or 7 official tracks now. There's a friend of mine actually who was the guy responsible for building those tracks, and another friend who's a bike guide. Did a lot in the last 15 years to really improve the mountain biking, and because it's so close to Morzine, and Morzine is so popular with mountain biking, you get a lot of people coming over. And yeah, in the last 10 years, I've seen it really blow up in all the magazines and all the mountain biking websites to become a really well-known destination for biking. And even had the Enduro World Series there now, as well as a couple of other bike races. So it's, like you say, it's up and coming. It's been there for a long time. It's since the 1950s or so. But a lot of people still don't know it, which is a shame because it really is a gem in the Alps.
It's interesting that it's also very great for mountain biking because the next door is Porte du Soleil, and also very famous for its mountain biking. The Haute Savoie seems to have taken the first steps in terms of not necessarily monopolizing, but creating the infrastructure for mountain biking over the Savoie district, which is this southern or more southern French Alps. Am I correct in saying that? And maybe you could also, just for our listeners, explain the difference between the two regions who don't know geographically, and what key resorts sit in which region.
Yeah, I think there's some people in the Savoie that would probably argue that there's places like Les Arcs or Bourg Saint-Maurice which are also doing a lot to encourage and pioneer in mountain biking, but it is true that the Porte du Soleil, particularly Morzine, Léger, and now the overspill into Samoëns and the surrounding areas, are incredible for mountain biking. All of the resorts are trying to make more of it, but yeah, I think you could say that the Northern Alps, especially the Haute Savoie, Châtel included, have got a great infrastructure for mountain biking, so probably slightly ahead of the more high altitude resorts, which in theory are usually above the tree line. So usually the tree line stops around 1600 meters altitude, and for me and many others, the best mountain biking tracks are in the forest. So when you go up above the forest, it's more like a lunar landscape, very rocky. That's not to say you can't have great riding above the forest too, but I think it helps to be in the forest to give a more immersive feel in that sport.
Which lends Grand Massif really nicely to the dual seasonality. And like, just to go back to your point around the fact that Samoëns, I like to, how my experience of the Grand Massif is that Flaine is where everybody goes to ski, but it dispelled going to Samoëns how much you don't necessarily need to be at high altitude living, because you can so quickly access that. But that valley is so wide and long, it's not windy, it's a proper true little village. So maybe you could just explain the Haute Savoie and Savoie divide for me.
Yeah, so Haute Savoie really starts somewhere around Albertville, so Megève, Chamonix, the Véjon Mont Blanc ski area, Grand Massif, Porte du Soleil, that's all in the Haute Savoie, all very close to Geneva. And then the Savoie itself is more like the Tarentaise Valley, where you have La Rosière, you've got Les Arcs, and then you get up into Val d'Isère at the end of that valley. And then you also have the three valleys, so places like Méribel, Saint-Martin-de-Belleville, that's all in Savoie. So the highest altitude that you can access skiing-wise, with Chamonix aside, because Chamonix you can ski up to 3,800 meters altitude. Most of the high altitude, or really high altitude skiing is down in Savoie, but we still have high altitude access in the Haute Savoie. For a place like Porte du Soleil, you can get up to 2,300 or 2,500 in Flaine in the Grand Massif. So it's still very high, but not your 3,200s and 300s that you can get in the Savoie.
So essentially, the further south and southeast you go, the higher it gets, the more wild the terrain becomes, the less accessible potentially as well, because we talked about Port du Soleil before, and now we're talking about Grand Massif. And it's so easy from Geneva. It's like just over an hour's drive, and then you're there. And so that speaks to this kind of all year round sense of opportunity and potential, both from an experience point of view, but that experience for obviously then spills over into rental yields and capital appreciation. This idea that the mountains are no longer just a winter season destination, but they actually offer something 365 247.
Yeah, I think a good example of that is I've got a couple of friends in Samoëns who live in London and Samoëns, so they'll spend maybe 4 days of the week in London working there, and then 3 days in Samoëns, because it's so easy to get there from Geneva, and that's a real pulling point for the resort.
Yeah, maybe you could also talk a little bit more about the makeup of the 5 ski resorts. Flaine being the centre and where everybody goes to ski. Samoëns is the biggest of the resorts and the lowest, and maybe just explain a little bit more about Morillon, Le Carreau and Sixt.
Yeah, sure. So Flaine, like you say, is the highest. It's at 1,600 meters altitude down in the village. It's not to everyone's taste in terms of the architecture. It's very concrete, and they tried to build it into the limestone rock that you see. If you see Flaine in the summer, it's hard to understand how you could ski there. There's holes everywhere. It's like a big network of caves. It's pretty incredible. And they have nets all over these holes to make sure people don't fall down them. But yeah, it's an incredible landscape. And then down in Le Carreau, it's much more in the trees. So really nice tree skiing. If the weather's bad, I always had headed to Le Carreau where the visibility is a bit better. That's down at 1,200 meters in the village, and there's a section of it at 1,600, and then you can get higher up above that. Samoëns, like you say, is down at 720, but with 2 lifts you're at 2,200 at the top of the Tête de Sey. And then further up the valley from Samoëns you have Sixt du Cheval, which is the most disconnected resort in the Grand Massif, but it's where you can end what they believe is the longest blue run in Europe, I think they call it. It's called the Cascade. It goes all the way from the top of Flaine down into Sixt. An incredible run, very easy, but just beautiful and picturesque. And that's right next to the Gerball, this powder ball I mentioned. But there's no lifts taking you from Sixt back up into the Grand Massif system, but there are lifts within Sixt itself. But because that's so low altitude and disconnected from the main resort, it doesn't get as good conditions as Flaine, Le Carreau and Samoëns.
Conditions-wise, how would you describe the sort of snowfall, the conditions there? They've got 139 slopes, 25 green, 59 blue, 44 red, and 11 black slopes across the area. And we'd already touched on it, that it's not particularly well known. So I'm trying to understand why you think that is. And obviously, there's probably a sense of marketing around that as well. But how would you say it compares in terms of like its actual skiing, its actual mountain biking to its neighbours of Chamonix and Port du Soleil?
I always say, now I live in the Port du Soleil, that I still prefer the skiing of the Grand Massif, mainly for the connectivity and, like you say, it's just so easy to get around and get into the high altitude, and the powder skiing is incredible as well. And because it's not as well known as Morzine, perhaps, it's not quite as busy. That's not to say it doesn't get busy in peak season. There have been times when I've seen huge lift queues there, and it's very popular with the French, the Dutch, the English. So, it's still, if you're renting a property out there, you can expect good rental returns. And the company I worked for had 45 chalets and apartments in the valley that were always full for the peak seasons. There is obviously the low seasons like you get everywhere, but in Samoëns itself, because it's low, you get spring sooner, it's warmer quicker, you can get rid of the snow off your driveway sooner. And there's a lot of activities, summer activities, so rafting, via ferrata, climbing, hiking. You have some amazing mountains around it. There's one called the Crieu, which looks like a huge pyramid rising up out of the village. And then down at the end of the valley, you have the Cirque du Cheval, which they call the Bout du Monde, which literally means end of the world. And it is honestly one of the most incredible places in the Alps. It's so beautiful, with waterfalls falling down into it and chamois up on the hills, and just incredible landscape right on the border of Switzerland. So it feels like Switzerland without the Swiss prices.
I think that low altitude, and I go in March most of the time, kind of end of the season, and you go up and you have the conditions that you need to ski and snowboard, but then you come down at the end of the day and you can almost walk around in a t-shirt and a jumper. and sit there and you talk about the other activities as well. Paragliding seems to be incredibly popular there, and at the end of the day, to sit on the balcony in spring weather, March, April time weather, and watch paragliding after a day of skiing and snowboarding, it feels like you've literally dropped out of one world to another world, which can be really nice after, especially 4 or 5 days in, and you're starting to feel a little bit tired and you want some kind of like comforts. And I think that for me really dispelled the idea that high altitude was the only way to go, or ski in, ski out was the only way to go, because the lower altitude resort as well is more favourable in prices, is more favourable in accessibility. I was reading about Samoëns in particular, saying that it has some of the best schools for beginners as well. And because of its access of only being an hour away, that's much easier for people to comprehend the idea of a ski trip, which then lends the idea that the rental activity is also really fantastic.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think it's a good point on the family-friendly skiing. I mentioned that the mountain biking isn't necessarily family-friendly. There's not a lot of green or blue runs, but on the contrary with skiing, there's a lot of green and blue runs and a lot of ski schools offering lessons to families and beginners. So it's great for that.
Who else do you see investing there? If you were going to pull out an ideal purchaser of a property anywhere in the Grand Massif, really, I think Samoëns really is kind of our favoured destination, when this interconnectivity really means that you have options available wherever you choose. But who do you see as being a key demographic of person looking for property across there?
Yeah, so it's quite a attractive price per square metre for the projects we're selling, and also just the market generally in Samoëns. So you're looking at between 6,000 and 8,000 euros per square metre, which is lower than all of the surrounding resorts and the other resorts we work in. So it's attractive for, I guess, what you would call your average buyer, not your super high net worths. That said, there are some high-end properties there at multi-million euros, but in general, you're looking at the people that want an apartment, a second home. There's a lot of people who've chosen to live there as well because of, like I say, the proximity to Geneva, the ease to get back to the UK. You do get a lot of Dutch there. There's a Dutch tour operator who brings in a lot of people on holiday, and a lot of these people have ended up buying there. And obviously the French. Then you get people from Geneva coming up, again, because it's so close. They come up for the weekend, or they might buy a second home there. So a mix that you see in Léger and Morzine as well, similar kind of clientele, but ones that are seeking a home, or a home from home that is not necessarily in a purpose-built resort like Flen with just a concrete jungle. They're looking for a charming village that has nice restaurants, nice shops, nice bars, a little lake, things you can do in the summer, and a place to spend time with family that's not necessarily just hardcore skiing from first lifts to last lift.
Talking about the kind of the rise in popularity, I was reading on OVO Network, which is a rental company out there, that a chalet between 200 and 300 meters squared in a Grand Massif resort, accommodating between 12 and 14 guests, can generate between 90,000 and 140,000 euros of rental income per year, and have an annual occupancy rate of 74%, which is a huge occupancy rate when you think about from an investor's perspective and people that are looking for a property where they can go and spend 6 weeks, maybe tops, throughout the year there, but wanting to rent it out for the rest of the year. It offers an attractive place for people to actually think about the next 10, 15 years. Because would I be wrong in saying that it's one of the fastest growing resorts or domains in its popularity?
I guess you could say it's one of the fastest growing in terms of the interest in it, but there's certainly limitations on where you can build there. It's a beautiful valley that the Mairie will be restricting where you can build new properties on. That said, there are some still going up, and we're selling one of them, which is called Septentrion, in the centre of the town, right next to the school. But the issue, or the benefit, actually, as I see it, with Samoëns is that there is limited stock, so you're not going to have a resort like Chamonix, which is really sprawling and lots of pollution and too many cars and things like that. That's not to say Chamonix is a bad place to be. It's an incredible resort, but it has suffered from its own success in terms of the magnificent surroundings, that it's extremely busy and has a lot of things going on there, whereas Samoëns a lot quieter. So that's an attractive thing for an investor. If you are looking for somewhere that's peaceful and not Courchevel 1850, that's crazy nightlife, then Samoëns is a great option for that. Much more family orientated, I think, and a great place to be with kids.
It's also, the Grand Massif is the first ski resort in the world to achieve the certification of the Golden Globe, Have you heard of this? The Green Globe. Sorry, I stand corrected. Yeah, the world's first. This is from Emerald Stay, actually, from the Emerald Stay website. A Green Globe certified resort. The Grand Massif is the first resort in the world to be awarded Green Globe certification for its slopes, lifts, and ancillary services. This certification is awarded when the resort complies with certain principles approved by around 100 governments. As part of a programme covering 40 themes, the emphasis is on supporting the local economy and protecting the environment through sustainable development. A follow-up audit is carried out every 2 years to reassess the resort's commitments. The Domaine du Grand Massif is involved in a number of initiatives, such as the monitoring of biodiversity over an area of 1,400 hectares and the promotion of the local economy with the creation of the Origin Grand Massif label in 2014. A series of measures have also been taken to reduce the impact of the environment, including the removal of old infrastructure, the distribution of pocket ashtrays to all holiday makers, the installation of waste bins at ski lifts, the introduction of selective sorting on the slopes, the use of organic oils for snow groomers, etc. Educational activities are also carried out to raise awareness of the local fauna. These actions contribute to the preservation of the environment and benefit everyone, residents and tourists alike. Ski resorts and real estate, through the nature of what they are, it's always going to be challenging to call themselves sustainable in any sort of way. Anything we do is not necessarily sustainable. But I think it's quite exciting for the Grand Massif, the fact that it is essentially, even though it's been around for as long as these other resorts, it's a kind of a latecomer to its advanced infrastructure and so on, which has given it an opportunity to go and look at the way that resorts have been over the years and start to do something differently. So I think it speaks of a resort to the future more challenging for a Chamonix or these other resorts that have already been built. Essentially, they're already at their limit of what they are, so they would have to unpack to then move into a more eco-friendly way, whereas the Grand Massif feels like it's kind of taken this path and trajectory to retain much more connection with nature than the other resorts potentially can.
It's a good point, and that's news to me, so it's good to hear that they're doing that. And like you say, it's very difficult, especially when flying's involved, to claim to be 100% sustainable. But a good point on the Samoëns side is that because of that low altitude, if you are driving there, you don't have to drive up to 2,000 meters on windy roads. So if you're driving an electric car, for example, it's a much more sustainable way of getting there, and the train infrastructure is getting better. So there is the Cluse nearby, which is not a pretty little town, but that's where one of the trains goes to, and Tonon on the other side. And there's a campaign from an organisation called Montagne Vert here in Morzine to get more services with these trains. The infrastructure is already there, and they're campaigning to put more service on so that people can travel from London or Belgium or wherever to the Alps, and Samoëns is very close to a couple of those train stations, so that's positive.
Always challenging to be as sustainable as possible, but I just think it's exciting when you see, especially places that are on the edge of civilization in many ways. Like, that's the last contact to suddenly a very wild and natural environment, and they're feeling the effects sometimes of climate change more than any. So to see them actually take active steps and look for certification like this, I think is super exciting.
Yeah, it's got to happen. It's good news.
Maybe you can just talk through the project that we have in Samoëns at the moment.
Yes, it's a new build project in the centre of the village, just right next to the school, and only a short walk to the restaurants and the bars and the shops. There is a ski bus stop right outside which takes you to the Grand Massif Express ski lift, which can take you up to 1,600 within about 7 minutes. So it's a really great location, nice views on the sunny side of the valley, sort of south-east facing. You can see in this picture here, this is the village centre. So as I was saying, really nice architecture, nice church. You're not far from some botanical gardens and the lake. There's a man-made lake in Samoëns where they have a driving range so you can hit balls onto the lake. Not real golf balls, but ones they recollect. And there's lots of tennis courts and an outdoor swimming pool. This is the Crew mountain that I talked about. So really beautiful, for me, a really iconic mountain that just rises straight up out of the village, up to 2,200 meters altitude. And there was one time I was actually sitting at the bottom of this mountain next to a river having my lunch, and I could hear this noise. I thought, what's that noise? I turned around, thought it was rockfall. I thought I was about to get hit by a load of rocks, and it turned out to be a base jumper who jumped off the top of the mountain, and he landed right next to me. Pretty scary, but great to see. So yeah, as you can see, very, very green in the summer. Down here at 720 meters. This is the plot, and you can see this line through the trees. This is the Grand Massif Express. So you go from this point here right up to 1600, and then from there up to 2200, which you can't see on this image. But yeah, truly, really beautiful village. You've got the Savoie forest behind. Don't tell many people, but one of the best mountain biking tracks in the world is in this forest.
And am I right in saying that Port du Soleil is just behind the Le Crieu?
Exactly. So up here where you can see my mouse, this is the Dent Blanche, a very wild mountain area, and actually one of the deepest caves in the world is up there. It's called the Gouffre Jean Bernard. And then just to the left of that you have Avoria, and left of that Morzine. So the Col de Jouplan, it's called, is the connecting col between Samoëns and Morzine, and that's where the famous road climb, which is often used in the Tour de France, goes up from Samoëns over to Morzine. Yeah, so an iconic road climb right out of your door as well. Beautiful place.
And the village itself, it's like you say, it's all year round, because you have schools, libraries, restaurants. It's not somewhere that's just purpose built as a ski resort. The ski resort came at a later date behind the village, and the village is so picturesque and beautiful. It's so quintessentially French. Like it was the first place that I've been skiing and snowboarding where you could just walk around it and enjoy being there and not worry about getting up into the mountains. And then you do get into the mountains, and they're wonderful mountains.
That's it. It's got a really warm feeling, hasn't it? And just really nice to wander around and have a van show in the town centre. Here you can see the botanical gardens, a really nice path going up through this forest. And yeah, it's just a great place all around, truly picturesque.
Last thoughts then on why you believe that the Grand Massif is such an exciting prospect for both an investor but also somebody looking out for an amazing experience all year round.
Sure. For me personally, and without exaggerating, if I could start again and reinvest and I was looking to buy anywhere in the Alps, Samoëns would definitely be up there. Having spent 3 years there and just got a feel for the really nice community, the beautiful village that isn't at all purpose built. It doesn't feel like you're in a ski resort. It feels like you're in a medieval village in some ways with beautiful architecture. That lower altitude I personally like because, like I say, you get the spring sooner. The summer activities are on another level compared to some of the places, and just incredible sports like biking, road cycling, paragliding, rafting. There's even the driving range, the golf. So truly brilliant in the summer, and then just this incredible ski area that's so well connected, which has got everything you need, whether it's family skiing, easy greens through the trees. Some of the best powder day I've ever had was in the Gerbol, champagne powder, where the snowflakes weren't even connecting to each other. They were individual, and when you ski through them, it's like nothing else I've ever experienced. And if you're into powder skiing, like I said, you can ski fresh lines for 9-10 days in a row if it stays cold, whereas Chamonix, it's getting tracked out very quickly. And for me, the Bout du Monde, the Cirque du Feu Cheval, if you go to Samoëns, you have to go there, winter or summer. It's like something out of Lord of the Rings, truly amazing. And the final thing is obviously that proximity to Geneva, so close and so easy to get there.
Well, you got me pretty excited about my trip. I've got I think about 5 weeks before I get out there. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, I'm very grateful because my friend invites me out to stay at his chalet. But it's always in kind of March time, so I haven't yet had that powder conditions that you're talking around. So I'm going to try and convince him maybe for an earlier trip next year. But Gil, thank you so much for your time. Always appreciate talking to you. And yeah, until next time.
Same to you. It's been fun. Thank you.